Something happened in the desert state of Chihuahua that Washington did not want you to connect the dots on, and now it's blowing up the entire U.S.-Mexico relationship. CIA operatives were operating inside Mexican territory, not with the knowledge of Mexico's federal government, not with the authorization of President Claudia Sheinbaum, and not under any framework that respects international law or sovereign borders. 4 CIA agents participated in a raid on a clandestine drug lab in Chihuahua. 2 of them were killed when their vehicle veered off a road and plunged into a ravine. And the moment that story broke, the contradictions from both sides started piling up like bodies at the border. Here's what you need to understand. Sheinbaum, for more than a year, had repeatedly underscored her country's sovereignty and publicly turned down offers by Trump of direct U.S. intervention against cartels. She drew that line in the sand clearly and repeatedly. So when the CIA showed up in Chihuahua without federal authorization, it wasn't just a diplomatic embarrassment, it was a direct challenge to her authority, her constitution, and her political survival. Sheinbaum said plainly, "We don't accept U.S. operatives participating in the field in Mexico." And then she went further. Mexico's Attorney General's office announced it intends to investigate 50 individuals who participated in the CIA-supported anti-drug operation in Chihuahua. That is not the response of a government that's backing down. But here's where this story gets deeper, darker, and far more dangerous. What likely triggered Washington's next move was precisely Sheinbaum's decision to question the legality of the CIA's presence, because the U.S. responded by indicting 10 Mexican government officials, and analysts are already calling it a shot across the bow. This is no longer just about a car crash in a desert ravine. This is about who controls the ground in North America, and whether Washington will accept a sovereign neighbor that says no. Let me take you back to that Sunday morning in mid-April. A vehicle carrying 4 people, 2 American citizens and 2 Mexican security officials, veered off a road in the rugged, remote terrain of Chihuahua State and plunged into a ravine. All 4 died. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident, a car crash, one of those terrible things that happens in the borderlands where roads are rough and nights are dark. But nothing in this neighborhood of the world is ever just what it looks like on the surface, because when you start pulling the threads on this story, what you find underneath is something that tells you everything about the state of American power, Mexican sovereignty, and the collision course that these 2 nations are now on. 4 CIA agents had participated in a raid on a clandestine drug lab in Chihuahua. 2 of them were killed when their vehicle veered off the road and plunged into a ravine. Now stop right there. Think about what that actually means. You have agents of the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America operating inside Mexican territory, not in some covert outpost, not behind embassy walls, but out in the field on an active counter-narcotics mission, riding alongside state-level Mexican law enforcement. And here is the part that should make your head spin. Sheinbaum acknowledged that Mexico's army participated in the operation, but maintained she had no knowledge that U.S. agents were present. The president of Mexico did not know that CIA officers were running an operation on her soil, or at least that is what she is saying. And frankly, whether you believe her or not, both possibilities are alarming. Either Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of a sovereign nation, was genuinely kept in the dark while American intelligence operatives worked side by side with her country's security forces, which means Washington essentially bypassed her government entirely, or she knew and now has to perform outrage for domestic political consumption. Either way, this is a crisis. Mexico's Ministry of Security revealed that one of the U.S. agents had entered Mexico as a visitor, while the other had done so using a diplomatic passport. Let that sink in. A CIA agent entered one of America's most strategically important neighbors using a tourist visa. That is not a sanctioned, coordinated intelligence operation between 2 sovereign governments. That is a covert insertion. That is how you slip someone into a country when you don't want the host government asking questions. This was not an accident of paperwork. This was deliberate. And it blew up, to literally and figuratively, in a ravine in Chihuahua. Now I want you to understand who Claudia Sheinbaum is, because the American media has a tendency to flatten foreign leaders into caricatures. Either they are our puppets or our enemies. She is neither. Sheinbaum has made a name for herself as something of a Trump whisperer, repeatedly weathering his threats of new tariffs and possible U.S. military action while managing to maintain strong support with voters, with some polls showing her with 70% approval ratings, 70%. In the middle of one of the most difficult geopolitical environments any Mexican president has ever faced, this woman is still commanding near supermajority support from her own people. That is not the profile of a weak leader. That is not someone who stumbles blindly into confrontation with Washington. And yet here we are. Because when you violate a principle that is sacred to the Mexican national identity, sovereignty over the homeland, even the most diplomatically careful leaders have no choice but to respond. We don't accept U.S. operatives participating in the field in Mexico, Sheinbaum said plainly at her press conference, and then she went even further. She said she was considering possible sanctions on Chihuahua's government and emphasized that the operation did not constitute a new security strategy by Trump in her country. She also sent a letter to the U.S. ambassador requesting all available information about the incident. This is a measured but unmistakable escalation. You don't send formal letters to ambassadors and threaten sanctions on your own state governments unless you are signaling that this is serious, that this is not going away, that someone is going to be held accountable. But here's the thing that makes this whole situation even more volatile than it already was. Just when Sheinbaum was navigating the Chihuahua fallout, trying to hold her domestic coalition together, trying not to antagonize Washington so badly that the economic relationship crumbles, the Trump administration dropped a nuclear bomb on the relationship. On April 29, 2026, the U.S. Justice Department charged Sinaloa State Governor Rubén Rocha Moya and 9 other current and former Mexican officials, alleging their involvement with the Sinaloa cartel. The indictment didn't just charge random low-level functionaries, it went straight for the heart of Sheinbaum's own political party. The indictment alleges that Rocha Moya and the others worked with cartel leaders to move large quantities of narcotics into the U.S. in exchange for political support and bribes, and that the scheme extended to Rocha Moya's 2021 election campaign, when members of the cartel's Chapitos faction allegedly helped secure his victory by kidnapping and threatening opposition candidates and stealing ballot papers. This is not just a drug case. This is an allegation that a sitting elected governor of Mexico got his job because a designated terrorist organization rigged the election for him. And the political pressure this creates for Claudia Sheinbaum is enormous, because Rocha Moya is not just a member of her Morena party. He is a close ally of Mexico's former president and Sheinbaum's political mentor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. This is her political family. These are the people she came up with. These are the relationships she owes her presidency to. And Washington just indicted one of them and demanded his extradition. As one professor of international relations put it plainly, there is no way out of this for Claudia Sheinbaum. Even if you give the U.S. what it wants, you can see from the past months that Trump will just ask for more. There is no limit. Think about that for a moment, because that analysis isn't coming from some fringe critic. That is a mainstream academic observer describing the logic of how American pressure campaigns work once they get going. You comply, and then you are expected to comply again, and the demands never stop escalating. We have seen this movie before, in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East. Washington finds a lever, and it does not stop pulling. And the moment you understand that dynamic, Sheinbaum's pushback starts to look less like political stubbornness and more like strategic self-preservation. Her response to the extradition demand was pointed. Sheinbaum said Mexico needed overwhelming and irrefutable proof before moving against Rocha and the others, and added, under no circumstances are we going to permit the intrusion or interference of a foreign government in the decisions that belong exclusively to the people of Mexico. Now, I want you to notice something here, because this is important. Legal experts pointed out that over the past 15 months, the Mexican government, operating outside the extradition or any judicial process, had already sent 92 individuals to face U.S. courts on cartel-related indictments. 92 people. Mexico had been delivering suspects to Washington at a pace that previous administrations never came close to matching. And yet the standard being applied to Rocha Moya was suddenly raised dramatically higher than it had been for anyone else. One extraditions expert said that for everyone else, the evidentiary bar was always very low, but in Rocha's case, it was raised to the maximum, as if Mexico's Foreign Affairs Ministry and Attorney General had to conduct a full trial themselves. You can draw your own conclusions about why, but the optics are not good. Now, here is where we have to zoom out and look at the big picture, because this confrontation is not happening in a vacuum. Under Article 34.7 of the USMCA, the 3 governments, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, must decide by July 1st, 2026, whether to extend the trade agreement for another term. July 1st, that is weeks away. And the trade relationship governed by that agreement covers roughly $2 trillion in commerce every single year. $2 trillion. So everything happening right now, the CIA exposure in Chihuahua, the indictment of Mexico's ruling party officials, Sheinbaum's defiant rhetoric, All of it is happening right on the eve of the most consequential trade negotiation that North America has seen in a generation. The first formal USMCA joint review negotiating round is scheduled for the week of May 25th, 2026 in Mexico City. That is now less than 3 weeks away, and the relationship between the two countries is on fire. Sheinbaum's strategy of de-escalation through verifiable actions and firm diplomatic messaging had, for the moment, avoided the most severe blanket tariffs on Mexican exports. But the strategy carries significant risk, because here is the fundamental tension at the heart of everything. Sheinbaum built her political credibility on two pillars. The first is sovereignty. No foreign military boots, no unilateral American operations on Mexican soil. The CIA and Chihuahua just smashed that pillar. The second is delivering results on security cooperation with Washington so that the economic relationship stays intact. The Rocha Moya indictment and the escalating demands now threaten that second pillar too. She cannot simply capitulate, because if she does, she loses the domestic legitimacy that makes her an effective partner for anyone, including Washington. And she cannot simply resist, because Washington controls too many levers: tariffs, trade, financial pressure, that can genuinely damage the Mexican economy and the Mexican people. What we are watching unfold right now is the logical endpoint of a foreign policy strategy that the United States has been deploying for decades, and it is not unique to Trump. The names change, the rhetoric changes, but the underlying logic of American exceptionalism, the idea that U.S. national security interests override the legal sovereignty of neighboring nations, that never changes. It has been there under every administration. Trump just says the quiet part loud. When the White House press secretary responded to Sheinbaum's criticism of the CIA operation by saying that U.S. counter-cartel efforts are not only a benefit to the American people, but to her people as well, that was not diplomatic language. That was a declaration. We will do what we believe is necessary, and you should be grateful. That is the language of a hegemon, not a partner. And I have to be honest with you about something else. The American public deserves to understand what the CIA was actually doing in Chihuahua. We are told it was a counter-narcotics operation, that these brave agents were dismantling drug labs and protecting American communities from the fentanyl that is killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. And that cause is legitimate. The fentanyl crisis is real. The cartel infrastructure is real. I am not here to romanticize the cartels or pretend that Mexico's security challenges are Washington's invention. They are not, but there is a profound difference between bilateral cooperation on security issues and unilateral clandestine operations carried out on the territory of a sovereign nation without the knowledge of that nation's president, with agents entering on tourist visas, working directly with state officials who were apparently not cleared to host them. That is not a partnership. That is an operation. And when it goes wrong, it does not just cost the lives of the agents involved. It detonates the entire diplomatic architecture that both countries desperately need right now. The new U.S. National Drug Control Strategy mentions on some 20 occasions that this is a matter of war in which the U.S. will employ all available diplomatic, intelligence, military, and economic tools. Read that carefully. All available tools, military tools. This is not background noise. This is doctrine. The Trump administration has systematically and deliberately constructed a legal and rhetorical framework that justifies unilateral military action inside Mexico. They designated the cartels as terrorist organizations. They invoked wartime language. They are now indicting sitting governors. And they were running CIA operations inside the country without federal authorization. Each step taken alone might seem like a discrete policy decision. Taken together, they form a pattern, and that pattern points in one very clear direction. Under the Trump administration, Mexico has handed over, captured, or eliminated more than 90 suspected drug kingpins, including Nemesio Oseguera, alias El Mencho, and Rafael Caro Quintero, the man behind the murder of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena, wanted by the U.S. since the Reagan era. Mexico has delivered. By any objective measure, Sheinbaum's government has cooperated with American security demands at a level that is historically unprecedented. And what has that cooperation earned her? More demands, a CIA operation she knew nothing about, an indictment targeting her political party, a looming trade review where Washington holds most of the leverage. The message being sent to every sovereign government in the Western Hemisphere right now is chilling. It does not matter how much you cooperate. It is never enough. And if you object to having your sovereignty violated, you will be punished for that objection. A rapid poll by Mexican pollster Massive Caller found that more than 70% of respondents believe Governor Rocha Moya is guilty of narco trafficking, and almost 80% said he should be extradited to the U.S. So here's the paradox that Sheinbaum is trapped in. Her own people largely believe the U.S. indictment has merit. And yet, the process by which Washington arrived at that indictment, covert CIA operations bypass sovereignty, political pressure, time to trade negotiations, undermines the very legitimacy that would make compliance politically viable. You cannot build a lasting partnership on a foundation of coercion. You cannot expect a neighbor to trust you when your intelligence agencies are entering their country on tourist visas. And you cannot expect a democratically elected president to survive politically if she is seen as Washington's instrument rather than her people's representative. This is what a sovereignty crisis looks like in 2026. It does not always come with tanks at the border or missiles in the air. Sometimes it comes with a vehicle sliding off a road into a dark ravine in Chihuahua, and the whole architecture of a bilateral relationship beginning to crack under the weight of what that crash revealed.